It does seem to be a really great occasion. I loved hearing all your views, and it's been friendly, supportive. I've not had any sense at all of anybody actually doing anything but learning a great deal from each other. It does seem that electricity is very tolerant of many kinds of discussions, very protean. Maybe just to summarize what we learned and look ahead of it. Certainly in the second session, we learned a great deal about social identities and choices, very richly looking away from the metropolitan male white engineer to the numerous other settings, which mattered a great deal. We see women advisors, farmers, punkawallas being part of the rich diversity of characters we need to look at. And how much their choices were constrained in all sorts of complex ways that were given to us in nice detail by our speakers. Definitely cultural history there has much to say to us. In the third session, certainly it was very clear that social science scholars have a very different take, but extremely useful complementary take on the kinds of issues that historians of electricity actually care about. It's obvious that we have much more to think about in terms of economics, power and ethics, as well as thinking about, how the imagination works and how international comparisons bring out a much deeper, a more rigorous approach to what we've been talking about, and ways it might indeed benefit the historiography of electricity. It's very evident also too from what we learned from Leonard that there's a bigger history, of energy, which we need to be thinking ourselves as part of. It seems possibly too narrow to just focus upon electricity by itself, and I think no one's been guilty of doing just that. It is very evident that there is much to learn from adopting a social theory to give us a bigger picture that helps us stand back from the micro detail of the archive. And then in the fourth session, it was very clear that the notion of modernity served really rather, I think, as a sort of whipping boy to actually show how much modernization is a complex and messy process that actually is different everywhere. I mean, in Montreal, it's been very difficult to make infrastructure invisible. And talking about wartime Harewood House, abandoning self-sufficiency to become part of a large-scale network was extremely troublesome indeed, actually, and full of tensions. Paul talked about how really it took World War I to generate the kind of centralized network that actually Britain came to rely upon after World War I. And Daniel showed us how much the process of Spain becoming electrified was very much a nationalist and post-imperial story that was peculiar to that part of the world. So that's what I learned. I'm sure others learned much more, and different things too. But thinking about the bigger questions that were raised by Daniel at the start, I think clearly system-centered accounts still matter, but let's think about what systems are the center of. They're center of a very big array of cultures and consumers, and centers which are not aware of how many contingencies there are out there are not going to succeed. It's very clear that those who generate the power supply for our cultures have to learn a great deal from how consumers behave, or indeed not always in a very compliant fashion. Cultures, well, I think many cultures exist within our societies. I think there's no one electrical culture that's become evident in any single one of our accounts. Maybe we need to be much more pluralist about the notion of electrical cultures in our studies. Evidently, for example, I mean, from what Abigail said, Michael said, aristocrats and their servants did not see things in the same way. It's not obvious they are perhaps entirely part of the same culture of consumption of electricity in the stately home. And in many ways, I wonder, if the word culture can be overworked, are we not just looking in the accounts we've heard today about contingently situated people's choices that were partly governed by culture, but partly governed by things which maybe were not part of that culture too? So what next? Well, maybe social scientists can keep historians on their toes, making sure they keep up to date with new approaches to how to handle present-day problems. And after all, in the middle of a pandemic, with economic situations getting worse and worse, we may have to make sure that whatever we do in our work actually is of value to governments and those who fund what we do. And conversely, I think it's also very clear that historians have a lot to offer those who work in the social sciences. I mean, taking them back to past stories, it might inform future studies. There's always a sense in which the history of electricity gives you a sense that there have been many challenges dealt with before in terms of consumers and how to adapt to their needs, which maybe central organizations perhaps could learn a lot from. We are definitely still useful. Although what I would also say is that we need to have maybe more of a sharp focus on the world of resistance. Not everyone that actually resisted electricity has been looked at nor has been well documented. Those who did not comply or did not take part are still silent in many of our narratives that need to be brought through. But overall, I would say that we've got a nicely wide range of things to look forward to in future studies. I think we will have a very eclectic future of the history of electricity. Thank you.